Out, it's snowing like crazy in our neck of the woods. Makes me kind of wish that we had the same kind of weather that Las Vegas has right now. But much like we saw last week, we saw a pretty damn good Cup race. Once again, it started out a bit slow, but it actually turned pretty good. So let's get into all that. This is Final Analysis. What is happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to today's edition of Final Analysis. A little bit different this week. And it's currently, at the time I'm recording this, 7:30 p.m. The race ended a little while ago. And I would say that NASCAR has gone 3 for 3 with the Cup Series this year, which, compared to last year, is quite the upgrade. Because last year, Atlanta and Vegas sucked. And this year, they've actually been pretty damn good, which is quite the improvement over the previous year. But there's quite a bit to talk about this week. Some good, some bad, and some that's really irritating. So let's go ahead and start with the beginning of the week on the Las Vegas dirt track. Hailie Deegan. She may be the future of this sport. She's not even old enough to smoke yet. And she pulls off yet another last lap pass in the K&N West Series, this time at the season opener in Vegas on the dirt track. Came from 4 seconds back with 13 laps to go. And unlike the previous time where she did the bump and run on her own teammate, this time around, she actually managed to get underneath of Jagger Jones, who was leading the race, and passed him cleanly in turns 1 and 2. And then Jones tried to do the bump and run and did not succeed because, well, it's Hailie Deegan and driving on dirt is her specialty. So she ends up with her second career K&N West Series victory. And both of those wins have come on last lap passes. So I think I'm going to start calling her the sniper, because that's pretty much what she's done in her 2 career K&N West victories, is snag them on last lap passes. So when the chips are down, you don't want her on your back bumper, because as we've seen in the past, she's good with those last lap passes. So excellent job by Hailie Deegan. And she also mentioned that she was going to do a few races in the ARCA series this year. At least 6 races with Venturini Motorsports. Venturini is basically the top dog in the ARCA series. So it'll be interesting to see how she does in the ARCA series this year with that team. So lots of exciting things for Hailie, and she even mentioned that she wants to go for the K&N West Championship. Boy, would that turn some heads. And then we get to the Trucks and Xfinity Series, and you only need to know one thing. Kyle Busch won them both and extended his all-time records in both to 93 wins in the Xfinity Series and 53 in the Truck Series. Kyle, I realize that it's your home track and that's why you wanted to run all 3 races this weekend, but seriously, get the hell out of the lower tier series. You have nothing left to prove. What is the point other than inflating your own numbers? There is no reason for you to be running in the lower tier series. And I went on this spiel last week about Kyle Busch running in the lower tier series. And here we are again this week talking about it. And it's just been getting so damn old. It's like, when is enough going to be enough, Kyle? Seriously. I realize that you're one of the best drivers that NASCAR's ever had, but you gotta learn when to say enough's enough. Okay, you've already more than proven your point in the lower tier series. There's absolutely no need for you to be driving down there anymore. Okay, you won the Xfinity race. I mean, if you weren't in that race, then that would have been John Hunter Nemechek's first career win. So you took that away from him. So seriously, Kyle, enough with this. Focus on Cup. That should be your primary job. And of course, you know, all of this Kyle Busch winning hubbubaloo has had an unintended side effect. And of course, I also touched upon this last week, and we really need to touch upon it this week as well. And that's the comparisons between Kyle Busch and Richard Petty. But it's gotten even worse than that. Because not only are people, starting to make the comparisons to Kyle Busch and Kyle Busch's 197 career NASCAR wins, National Touring Series wins, and Richard Petty's 200, but there are a lot of people that are out there saying that Kyle Busch's 200 wins are even more impressive than Richard Petty's 200 wins. And there were actually two people that have tried to dig up past races that are over half a century old, nearly 6 decades old now. And there were two people on Twitter that brought up that I think Richard Petty's first career win at Richmond in 1961, at least I think that's what it was. It was one of his, if it was not his first career win, it was one of his first. And it only had a field of 12 cars. And there were a couple guys on Twitter that were like, yeah, this isn't a Cup Series win.
What the fuck, man?
There are people that are now trying to say that some of Richard Petty's Cup victories aren't actually Cup wins, because the results say 1961 Grand National Series. When they see Grand National, they're thinking, oh, they're talking about the Busch Series, right? I swear, some of the people of this millennium are just frickin' stupid. Either that or they're ignorant. Okay? Because, number one, the Busch Series didn't come into being until 1982. And that's when it became the Grand National Series. But until Winston came on board in the early 70s, the Cup Series was actually known as the NASCAR Grand National Series. In 1949, they were known as the Strictly Stock Division, because there were actually two divisions back then, the Modifieds and Strictly Stock. And then in 1950, Strictly Stock was put ahead of the Modifieds and was renamed the NASCAR Grand National Series. And that's how it stayed until, I think, 1973, when Winston came on board as title sponsor, and that's when it became the NASCAR Winston Cup Series. But there are people, and I think these are Kyle Busch fans too, they're trying to discredit Richard Petty, some of Richard Petty's victories, to try to put Kyle Busch ahead of Richard Petty, which is absolutely ridiculous. And even Kyle Busch himself has said, you guys can't compare my victories to Richard Petty's. What Richard Petty did will never be matched again. This is coming from Kyle Busch. So some of you fanboys of Kyle Busch need to open up your ears a little bit and listen. Kyle Busch himself is saying this. He said himself that I will celebrate my own 200 wins across all the series, but nobody's going to come close to what Richard Petty equaled, because all of Richard's wins were in the Cup Series. Okay, and while Kyle's victories, the amount of victories that he has is impressive in and of itself, and he has 51 career wins, which, I mean, there's only a handful of drivers that have more than a half century total in career wins. He's even said himself, quit comparing what I've done to Richard Petty. Because even he's starting to think it's ridiculous. Of course, you can blame Nick Bromberg for some of the fire that's being stoked here with some of his Twitter posts. Of course, this coming from a columnist for Yahoo Sports, it really doesn't surprise me, because those guys are nothing but hacks anyway. How a columnist who's supposed to be reporting sports, is that friggin' ignorant? How does this guy have a job? I don't care if they're troll tweets or not. His job is to be reporting sports, not doing BS like he's been doing on Twitter. It's ridiculous and it needs to stop. Period. It's just another battle in this long-standing civil war among the NASCAR fan base. And quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of it. I mean, NASCAR is starting to head in the right direction this year, and people are still going at each other's throats for whatever reason. It's why I don't associate myself with this fan base. It's ridiculous. But anywho, let's go ahead and get into the Pennzoil 400, the race itself. What did I think of the race overall? It was actually pretty solid. Didn't start off that way though, because like Atlanta, the first stage sucked. I'm just gonna be upfront with you. Stage 1 sucked. And I was like, I really hope this is not what's going to happen the rest of the race, because I mean, it's like they've been hyping up this package, for several months, and stage 1 was not that good. I mean, it started out kind of crazy. I mean, there was one point where they showed there was a 6-pack going into turns 1 and 2, 2 rows of 3 wide, which was like, holy crap. But they actually managed to make it through, which I want to bring up something else as well. If you don't count the stage breaks, which I don't, this race went caution free. There was a lot of fear throughout the garage that this package was going to cause like big ones and stuff like that, and there was going to be a lot of attrition. This race went caution free. And if you don't count the stage breaks, this is the first race since the 2002 EA Sports 500 at Talladega that a cup race has gone caution free. Wrap your mind around that. And some of these guys were just, I mean, there were some crazy passes. Not really so much in stage 1, but in stages 2 and particularly stage 3. I mean, there was some contact, there were some guys brushing the wall, but no cautions. So I was very impressed with all these drivers out there. We never see caution-free races anymore. I mean, this is only the second time, I think, this millennium that we've had a caution-free race. And that's just a mind-blower. And of course, if you don't count the stage cautions, which I don't. But that being said, Kyle Larson got penalized early on for too many men over the wall. And this is actually one of the things I wanted to talk about that kind of irritated me. And that's too many men over the wall, where I know they explained it, but I still think it's more of a nitpicky penalty than anything else. Where if there's a guy standing next to the wall who his job is to grab the tires from the tire carrier and bring them back over the wall. Apparently, if a part of their hand touches the ground in the pit box, that's considered too many men over the wall. To me, that's just yet another dumb penalty that NASCAR has tacked onto the rule book. I mean, that is such a wishy-washy penalty. I mean, it's already bad enough that these crews, have one less man over the wall than they did in years past. Of course, I think they've all adjusted to it. But to me, that's a ticky-tacky penalty. And it just seems kind of ridiculous. To me, it's more of a nitpicky penalty than anything else. And it's just something I don't agree with. Now, if the guy actually went over the wall, like for realsies, then fine. But, I mean, penalizing, and it happened twice in this race too. Kyle Larson and Austin Dillon. They were both penalized for too many men over the wall because the guy on the other side of the wall touched the ground with his hand. I'm sorry, but that's a ridiculous penalty, and it shouldn't be enforced that way. I'm sorry. It's stupid. Blaney's day went south early on with the left rear tire going flat, and of course that was after he had made his pit stop, but apparently one of the lug nuts hit a valve stem and it deflated the tire, so he had to come back in. Suarez was one of the guys who stayed out for a long while and finally pit with 20 laps to go and only took right side tires, which actually worked out for him because he ended up 9th at the end of the stage, which is 2 points. And Kevin Harvick won stage 1, and he was pretty dominant in that stage. So he wins yet another stage, gets another playoff point, and the stage sucked. That's about all I got to say. Keselowski took just 2 tires, and Kyle Busch was the first off with 4 tires. So stages 1 and 2 were 80 laps. Stage 3 was 107 laps. We finally got our first pure lead change on lap 98 when Joey Logano took the lead from his teammate. And then we had our second pure lead change when Kyle Busch took the lead for the first time on lap 121. Logano kicked off green flag stops on lap 125, and it was at this point that Kyle Busch was caught speeding on pit road. And I kind of saw that coming from a mile away because he came in really hot onto pit road, even locked up the right front. And I was like, yeah, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he was caught speeding, and turned out to be the case. So that pretty much put him back in the pack, and even though he was able to come back to finish 3rd, that speeding penalty pretty much cost him the race, because without any caution flags, he couldn't catch back up. I mean, he managed to get back to within 2 seconds of the lead, which after, being penalized for speeding is pretty damn impressive. but there's no doubt that if he hadn't had that speeding penalty, I think he would have won this race. Byron stayed out the longest and finally pit with 12 laps to go. Only took fuel to try to get some stage points, but that didn't work out. Joey Logano wins stage number 2, with Harvick second and Truex finishing third. Logano won the race off of pit road, and then Truex kind of fell back to the field at the start of stage 3. He was restarting in like 6th, but fell back to like 15th or so, and it took him a while for him to get that car back going. Kurt actually stayed out and led the start of stage 3, and he actually was out in front for a little bit. But this was when the race really started to kick into overdrive with the pure lead changes, because we only had 2 in the first 2 stages, and then we get 6 in the 3rd stage, all without cautions, might I add. So pure lead change number 3 was Joey Logano on lap 169. He was underneath of Kurt Busch and managed to get to the line first. But Kurt Busch would take the lead back 1 lap later for a fourth pure lead change on lap 170. Then eventually Kevin Harvick would get by Kurt on lap 188 for a 5th pure lead change. Alex Bowman kicked off the last round of green flag pit stops with 58 laps to go. Then we had our 6th pure lead change of the day on lap 210 when Joey Logano took the lead once again, this time from Kevin Harvick. And of course this was in the middle of green flag pit stops, and then they all came to pit road. Logano retook the lead after the pits cycled around with 40 laps to go. Then we had our 7th pure lead change when Brad Keselowski caught up with Logano and passed him on lap 240, so kind of a mirror image of Atlanta, where Logano was chased down by Keselowski and Keselowski took the lead, although this time around Logano didn't have a loose wheel. And then we got our 8th and final pure lead change on lap 245 when Logano took the lead back. Keselowski had one last move in him. He tried to dive bomb in turns 3 and 4, but just came up short, and Joey Logano wins the Pennzoil 400, which is kind of ironic considering that his car is sponsored by Pennzoil. So I'm pretty sure that made the title sponsor of this race very happy to see a car that they're sponsoring end up in victory lane. So Logano wins the race, Keselowski 2nd, Kyle Busch ended up 3rd, Kevin Harvick 4th for the 2nd straight week. Kurt Busch ends up 5th, so he's giving that one car a pretty damn good ride. Stenhouse Jr., that 17 team has come alive this year. I mean, they've been doing pretty good this year. And Eric Almirola, Truex, Chase Elliott ended up 9th, so finally got a top 10 at Las Vegas. And then Denny Hamlin rounds out the top 10. So, had another solid race that actually went caution-free, which was shocking to say the least. But so far, I would say 3 races, 3 thumbs up for the Cup Series. So I tell you, IndyCar's got its work cut out for them when it starts up next week too. And on that note, I also have my work cut out for me next week too, because I'm going to be editing 2 races. And I'm going to pay attention to 2 races as well. So next week's going to be busy as all hell. Oh Lord. But, you know, it is what it is. But, with that being said, my final rating for the Pennzoil 400 at Las Vegas, it was very similar to Atlanta last week, but it had 1 fewer pure lead change. Although it did go caution-free, so there was that as well. And the race went by pretty damn fast. I mean, it started at 3:45 Eastern, and it ended at around 6:15, so about 2.5 hours to go 400 miles. That's pretty damn fast. Of course, it also helps when you don't have, you know, caution flags, and it's just the 2 stage breaks. I think I'll give the Pennzoil 400, I'll give it a 7.25 out of 10. I think it was better than the Daytona 500. I think it was just slightly behind the Atlanta race in terms of quality, but I'll go ahead and give it a 7.25 out of 10. So that'll be my final rating for the Pennzoil 400. 3 races in, and every single one of them has scored a 7 or above this year. That is a massive difference from last year, because I remember I gave the 500 last year, I think like a 6, right around there. And then the Atlanta race got a 3, and the Vegas race last year got a 0. So far this year, the Cup Series has seen a massive improvement. So, all 3 races so far this year, 2 thumbs up. Well, that's going to do it for me this week here on Final Analysis. Next week, the West Coast swing continues as the Cup Series heads to Phoenix, now known as ISM Raceway. See how that race goes and see if they can make it 4 for 4. Typically, Phoenix is pretty good, so hopefully we'll see some more of the same type of racing next week, even though I don't think the mile-long tracks use this race package. But Phoenix is typically a good race, so we'll have to wait and see. But anywho, thank you very much for watching. As always, this is the PackerMan signing out. Till next time.